forcing in the treatment, what do you call it, the Versailles, and forcing, and Germany and Germans, the land itself was not invaded. And some people may say that militarily they may not have lost on one front anyway. They may have lost on the French front, but not on the Russian front. So there is a big element of betrayal by their leaders and by their neighbors. And I can assure you, Iraqis feel the same. Even up to now, even after 20 years or 18 years, we still have this sense of betrayal or sense of our neighbors. And this is a similarity. Another big picture similarity is the formation of the politics. No single one or two or three or four or five parties dominated, but so many. No single party dominated in one region, but each region had their own local politics playing part in it. And no single figure dominating of the politics. And hence, the constant change of the prime minister or the chancellor so many times. So you have no continuity of leadership, no continuity in dominance of politics, lack of cohesion of the politician, lack of trust, a zero-sum culture. In that aspect of it, let's say if you follow current German politics of any other mature country's politics, nobody sort of labels the other with treason. You may say you are incompetent, you may say you are not capable of delivering, but nobody blames the other for treason. In our current Iraqi politics and in the Weimar period, blaming the other politicians as treason or not being nationalist or not being German enough or not having the thinking was the norm. So this is a very destructive type of politics. You may question the other politician's capabilities, but you should not question his authenticity, nationality, pride, the best thing for his country. So the culture of politics was a zero-sum, as much as we have this. And we had it only 3 days ago. The UNAMI representative in her speech at the UN talked about a zero-sum culture. So you have a political culture, big picture perspective, very similar. A regional geopolitical sense, very similar. History of society's view of the state, a new state, very similar. And then this society tries to rediscover or discover democracy on a trial and error approach, which we are doing in Iraq again. However, if you compare Germany in Weimar versus Germany in 1949, you have a clear sense of two different pictures altogether. Why? Because in 1949 onward, Germany did a big, deep reflection. What we miss in Iraq now is a big, deep reflection. And you could see that clearly in the statement of the UNAMI representative at the Security Council 2 days ago. That what is missing, if you look at Iraq's situation, what is bigly missing is a reflection. For you to do the reflection, you need to identify or have a few characteristics. One is you have to admit that you are wrong. Two, you have to admit that you need to seek help for yourself or with others. Three, you have to compare and learn from other countries. Otherwise, what you're reflecting on, what is the input coming in from others? And so many other features or characteristics you need to make sure that you learn from your experiences. And this is what we are missing in Iraq. People talk about ISIS and Daesh, resurgence, or Al-Qaeda or others, but only a few years ago, we had a big war and we should have liberated our countries and we should have got our politics fixed. Or people talk about other problems we have with corruption and constitution not being reviewed and other aspects of it, so many of them, which tells you that there has not been a reflection. If you look at countries who are formed or who define a new constitution, look at start from, say, US constitution onward. You will find that every few years after this new state or new constitution, there is a new version of the constitution, a second, a third, and so on. Iraq have not had any revision of the constitution since its formation. So nobody's telling me that it was so perfect you don't need to change it. So why not? And I'll move to the last point, which is the Constitution. Did it allow for revision? Did it allow for its self-correction? Or is it rigid enough or fixed in which the culture may not allow for it to be reflected, and therefore that leads to a political blockade. It leads to a stage where you feel that there is no more things to do. There is no more help we can provide. And if you could see the speech 2 days ago by the UNAMI representative, she clearly said there is no point of you having an election. And she gave 3 reasons why we should not have an election, although everybody thinks this might be the way out. But in reality, I think she's right. The election requires different mindset. It's an element of reflection. But if you're not willing to have a reflection, the elections become futile. So here, when I talk about after the compare and contrast, I do what I call few takeaways and few lessons for Iraq to learn from. I'll cover these quickly and then I'm done. Now I've done the compare and contrast in the big picture perspective. As to the lessons learned, one key lesson is that Constitution itself alone cannot protect the system. You require a culture to be associated with it. You require visionary leaders to be associated with it. And you certainly require selfless leaders, those who have what we call in Arabic إيثار, درجة عالية من الإيثار, to be associated with it, to be able to manage the transition of the state from a totalitarian to a democratic. So one big lesson taken away is don't over-depend on the Constitution and don't consider that the Constitution is the only problem you have. We do need to revise it, but we need to think of it in the collectiveness of it. So it needs to be a package solution for it. Another aspect of it is the demonization of culture, which we need to move away from. A third one, which talks about the role of family in the development. In Iraq, we have a major problem of most of the political leaders dependent on their nephews, nieces, and tribal and close, which creates its own problem. So we have dynasties rather than having a republic. And this is one of the ironies. In republics, you should not have dynasties, but we do. So the new republic are usually fragile at their conception stage. It needs to be nurtured by the neighbors and the internal players. Here, the international community and the regional countries need to deal with Iraq in its fragile way and not to be harsh with it. And that was one of the problems we have with our neighbors. It may have been caused by Iraqis, but also with the neighbors. I'll finish with just maybe one statement. Oh, actually 2. One is that the clock is ticking. So time is not with us for a number of reasons. If the problems in Iraq started in 2003 or 5 being a political problem, in due time it moved to become a social problem and also an economical problem. And now we have also an environmental problem and so on. So by not addressing the issues in due time, it becomes much more complicated, bigger legacies to address, and therefore any new prime minister or any new cabinet comes in, they cannot deal with only few issues, but they have to deal with the full legacy of the previous administrations, because no government has been able to address issues. That's one big lesson, or one big finishing point to talk about. The other finishing point, which people asked me when I wrote this paper, since I wrote this paper, was who is Hitler? Who is the new Hitler of Iraq? Who is the next Hitler of Iraq? Because I'll talk about in a minute why I wrote this paper, to be honest. My view of it is I think you are asking the wrong question. The question should not be who's the next person who pulls the trigger, whether it's Hitler or somebody else, but that you should not even have a gun, a loaded gun there. So you should prevent the gun from being there so that anybody rash or irrational can pull the trigger. You should not provide an environment where there is the loaded gun. And don't focus on the Hitler person. For those Iraqis, and Germans know that, but Iraqis don't know, that Hitler was only able to obtain German citizenship in 1932, only 1 year before he became chancellor. And he even got his German nationality because of the election for presidents, not for chancellor. He put his name forward to become a president, and he lost. And he got substantial votes. I mean, he didn't get very few. No, he got substantial vote. So whether a republic produces a Hitler or somebody else, we need to be careful, wary, and cautious about it. But we should focus on not creating the environment where beast dictators like Hitler are produced. So we need to be big picture. As to why I wrote the paper, I have to admit I wrote it to frighten people. I wrote it to warn Iraqis. I wrote it to make sure that people do learn from a harsh example, which led to 55 million people being dead as a result of that in the Second World War. And history are there for us to teach from. Definitely history does not repeat itself if we reflect back. If we don't, then yes, it does repeat itself. Thank you again for the time, and thank you for allowing me to talk about a topic which you can see I'm emotional in. But I also wrote it with a clear sense of objectivity. Thank you again.